The desert remembers. Even when the sky is clean and the sun blinding, even when the footprints are swallowed by wind, nothing is ever truly gone. The dust holds names no one dares to say, footsteps that meant goodbye, blood that dried too fast, and now it holds her, her shape bending under the heat, her silence cutting through the air like a warning. She walks not with purpose but with surrender, the kind that no longer fights, just continues. She doesn't know if she's running or returning. She only knows that stopping would be the same as dying. Her baby breathes steadily against her chest, but her own breath breaks, shallow, uneven, not from exhaustion, but from memory, from all that she carried and all that she lost. There is no map in her hands, no destination in her eyes, only that broken pendant swinging softly in her fist, a shape worn smooth by fingers that once trembled and now cling, a small name carved into it, barely visible, like a prayer that never reached the sky. The massacre had taken voices, bodies, fire, and soil, but not names. Names stay even in dust, even in silence. Her dress is torn, not from cactus thorns, but from the night she ran, from the grasp that didn't come from enemies, but from neighbors, the ones who used to nod in passing, the ones who let it happen. A vulture stands on a rusted post ahead, its wings tight, its gaze fixed, watching her the way men watch what they don't understand. She watches back, not with fear, but with knowing. She knows this land, she knows death. One of them will live, one of them will fly, but only one of them knows how to carry grief across sand without letting it spill. She walks past. The bird doesn't move. The baby shifts, not crying, not fussing, just living, just being. And that's the reason her feet keep moving. Not faith, not revenge, just this soft breath against her ribs. A sound so small it might be mistaken for wind, but it isn't. It's a reminder, the last one she has. She wipes her face with the back of her wrist, smearing salt and dust. She hasn't cried in days, maybe weeks. The tears dried up back when the drums stopped and the flames began. What's left now isn't emotion, it's function, it's forward. Far ahead, just past the curve of the dead hill, something breaks the rhythm of sand and rock. Canvas, a tent, old, sagging, the kind used by soldiers who no longer had orders. A flag hangs over it, red and crossed, a symbol she was taught to run from. And yet, she doesn't stop. Danger is not always the loudest thing in the room. Sometimes danger is memory. Sometimes danger is love. Tonight, even danger has shade, and that's enough. Her legs tremble, not from fear, but from the weight of continuing. She adjusts the wrap over the child, tightens the cloth and moves closer, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. The sky dims into copper, the kind of dusk that feels like forgiveness. The wind slows, and still, she doesn't look back. There's nothing behind her but bones and betrayal. What waits ahead might be death, might be pity, might be something else. She doesn't ask. She doesn't hope. She arrives. And in that act alone, she survives. The flap of the tent doesn't move. The wind is too tired, and so is he. Inside, the man doesn't lift his head at first. There's been too many false alarms, too many ghosts playing tricks with the dust. But then, he hears nothing. And that, more than any noise, makes him stand. He pulls back the canvas and finds her standing just beyond the shadow line. Still, bare, dust clinging to her like a second skin. Her eyes unreadable, her arms wrapped around the child not in fear, but in instinct. The kind of instinct that doesn't ask if the other man is enemy or ally. It only asks, is there shade? Is there still time? The first thing he feels is not threat, not duty, just confusion. He hadn't spoken to a woman in months, hadn't seen one up close since the fever took the last nurse. What he sees now is not an intruder, not even a trespasser. What he sees is someone more tired than he is, and that alone stays his hand. The rifle leans against the chair near the table, just 3 steps away, but his boots don't move, his fingers don't twitch. There is something ancient in the silence that stands between them, something sacred, something that says, we have both lost too much to draw weapons tonight. The child shifts. The man notices how tightly she holds it, how her shoulders don't sag even though her knees look close to folding. That grip, that sacred instinctual grip, pulls a memory from the bottom of his chest. A small room, a cradle, the smell of ash and lilacs. A daughter who never reached her first word. and the sound of his wife's arms around her, protective in a way he never understood, until there was no one left to protect. The woman doesn't speak. She doesn't enter. She waits as if for a signal that he doesn't know how to give. Not a wave, not a word. Just something, some shift in the air that says she won't be hunted here. His hands stay at his sides, not out of control, but out of choice. The kind of choice that grows heavy in war and even heavier in peace. He sees the blood crusted on her heel, the crack in her lip, the way the baby's blanket is folded with care despite the dirt. That's when it happens. Not mercy, not charity, just movement. He steps back, just enough to let her pass if she chooses. Just enough to say there's fire inside, there's a pot on the coals, there's no locks here, no bars, just breath, just bones, just silence. She steps in. He doesn't speak, neither does she, but something ancient passes between them. Something older than war, something older than names, and the gun stays by the chair, because some nights even hate forgets its cue, and sometimes an unloaded gun is louder than a loaded one. The fire inside the tent crackled like distant memories, faint, persistent, unwilling to die. She did not remove her shawl, only pulled it tighter, as if the threadbare cloth could still offer protection against a world that had already taken too much. She moved slowly, not from hesitation, but from knowing that safety is never certain, not even in the presence of silence, not even when the air is still. He pointed to the blanket, to the corner near the fire. She looked once, then nodded once. No words passed, only breath, only a thread of mutual understanding too soft to be called trust, too loud to be ignored. She laid the child down first, gently. The baby stirred, pressed its face into the hollow of her arm, then settled. Her fingers hovered over the child's forehead a moment longer, as if she were sealing a prayer without sound. Then she sat, then she lay, but her body never softened. She slept facing the door, always the door. Not out of superstition, but because of what had come through doors before. Boots, fists, fire, strangers with lawless eyes. Her sleep was never deep, not since the raids, not since the treaties turned into traps. Even now, under canvas and stars, with a stranger who hadn't raised his hand nor his voice, her breath came in shallow waves. Her fingers curled around the hilt of a small knife, hidden in the folds of her skirt. She did not grip it. She just needed to know it was there. He didn't sleep either. He sat near the fire, eyes half closed, watching shadows lean against the canvas like ghosts pacing outside. He didn't speak, didn't stir. He just sat in the way a man sits when the past has already taken everything worth stealing. She noticed that. Even with her back to him, she noticed. The baby didn't cry that night. Not once. As if it knew, somehow, that the mother needed rest more than it did. As if the child, barely breathing, chose silence as a gift. That stillness, in the middle of so much unknown, wrapped around them like something holy, a fragile mercy, a breath that held. She dreamt. In the dream, a hand reached out to her, rough, sun-darkened, calloused. It hovered near her cheek, trembling slightly. It didn't touch, it just lingered like it wanted to remember what gentleness felt like. Then it pulled back. She didn't know if it was his hand or another's, but she woke with tears pressed into her pillow, not cried, just pressed there, as if they'd slid down her face without her noticing. Some kindnesses arrive too late, but even in dreams, she wanted to believe in them. Even in sleep, she faced the door, because doors never forgot how to open, and neither did the past. When morning came, the light was thin and slow, sliding across the ground like it wasn't sure it was welcome. She had not moved much through the night, just shifted the child once, adjusting the blanket with hands that remembered another winter, another shelter, another face beside the fire. The tent smelled of wood smoke, of dry wool, and faintly of something warm simmering in the pot. He was already at the small iron kettle, ladling out soup into 2 dented tin bowls. The steam rose in steady curls, the kind that filled the air without rushing. He didn't look at her when he placed one of the bowls near her corner. It was not an invitation, not an order, just a presence, something given without price or question. She didn't take it right away. She watched his hands instead, the way he ladled the broth slowly, not to measure the portion but to keep his grip steady, as though proving to himself as much as to her that his hands were not meant only for holding rifles or digging graves. She noticed the scar along his knuckle, the slight tremor that faded only when he set the bowl down. The child stirred, eyes half closed, and she knew the choice wasn't about trust. It was about milk, about keeping life moving forward, one swallow at a time. She picked up the spoon. In his world, talking had been replaced by chewing, in hers by watching. She let the first mouthful linger. Salt, smoke, and something earthy she couldn't name. It pulled her backward through time, to her grandmother's small clay pot over a fire pit, roots pulled from the frozen ground, a smell that once meant safety before the march west began. He ate quietly, not glancing up. The fire popped once, and the child made a soft sound in her sleep. That was the only noise between them. Halfway through she slowed, letting the warmth spread. Not because she trusted him, not because she wanted to stay, but because survival sometimes means accepting what is given, even from hands that once carried the wrong flag. When she finished, she set the bowl down with care, not wanting the sound to break whatever was holding the air in place. He gathered it up without a word. She did not thank him. He did not expect her to. It wasn't food he had offered. It was a pause, a brief, fragile pause in the long road between danger and escape. And that, for now, was enough. The day wore itself thin without much noise. She stayed near the tent's shadow, resting the child in her lap, sewing a loose seam along the blanket's edge with a bent needle she kept in her pouch. He moved between the fire and the small crate where he kept his things. Boots, a folded coat, a tin of tobacco worn soft at the corners. It was when he leaned down to stoke the coals that something slipped from his jacket pocket. A folded paper, creased so many times it looked ready to split. It landed close to her feet. She didn't reach for it, but the wind did, lifting the edge so the ink showed. She saw one word first. Daughter, written in a hand heavy and deliberate. A line had been drawn through it, and beneath it, in the same hand, another word. Ghost. The letters were smaller this time, as if he had been afraid they might be read aloud. He noticed her gaze and stepped forward, picking it up before the wind could take more. He slid it back into his jacket, his jaw set in a way that didn't feel like anger, only memory pressing too hard against the present. She didn't ask. He didn't explain. The rest of the afternoon passed in a silence that had changed shape. It wasn't the guarded stillness of strangers anymore. It was heavier, shared like the sound that follows a church bell. She knew, without knowing the details, that whatever had been written on that paper was not meant to stay in ink. It had already been carved into him. That night, while he sat outside near the embers, she reached into the small pouch at her waist and took out a single carved wooden bead. It had been her brother's once, tied at the end of a string he wore around his wrist before the soldiers came. She turned it in her fingers for a long time, feeling the grooves, the oil of years, the faint smell of smoke that no fire could wash away. When she finally rose, she placed it on his cot, just above where his hand would land when he lay down. No note, no words, only that bead, small and round, carrying more truth than a letter could ever hold. She returned to her place by the child and lay down, her eyes open until the dark grew too deep to hold. Somewhere behind her, the floor of the tent creaked as he stepped inside. A pause, then the faintest sound of wood rolling in his palm. The night passed without footsteps, without voices. Only the fire's slow breath and the tent's gentle sway when the wind came low from the east. She lay still, her arm curved around the child, half waking at every shift in the air. He didn't move much either, but she could hear the weight of him turning once or twice, the cot creaking under a body that had learned to rest lightly. Dawn came the way it often does in the desert, first as a thin line of silver along the horizon, then as a slow washing of pale gold over the ground. That was when the baby stirred, not with a whimper but with a sudden piercing cry that broke the tense stillness in two. She moved to lift the child, her hands already shaping the soft bundle against her chest, but before she could hush it, he was there. Not close enough to take the child, not reaching too quickly, just standing near, his eyes steady and, strangely, soft. Then, without thought, he hummed, low, uneven. The kind of sound made not to soothe an audience, but to keep one's own hands from shaking. The melody was rough, almost shapeless, but it carried a weight that wasn't born here. A hymn, she realized, from his side of the war. A song meant to march men forward. Yet here it was something else entirely. A lullaby stripped of its purpose, turned into a bridge between two people who had nothing but the present moment in common. The baby's cries eased, not because of the words, there were none, but because of the rhythm. Her own breathing shifted with it, as if the sound reached not just the child, but the part of her that had been frozen since the night her village burned. She watched as he reached out slow enough for her to stop him. She didn't. His hand touched the baby's cheek with the care of someone holding something more fragile than bone. His fingers trembled just once. She saw the years in that tremor, the absence of a daughter, the echo of a wife's arms, the weight of a letter folded too many times. When he pulled back, he didn't speak. Neither did she. The child settled between them, its breath sinking with the fire's last embers. The morning light spilled across the tent floor, touching all three of them in the same way, without asking permission. By midday, the heat had settled over the land like a held breath. She kept the child shaded, feeding it in the quiet space just outside the tent, while he busied himself with repairs along the canvas seams. They spoke little, only small exchanges about the fire, the water, the shifting wind. Yet in those fragments, something had changed. There was no war in their tone now, no suspicion, only the muted understanding of two people who had stood too long in the path of loss. When the sun bent westward, she rose and began to wrap the child. The movements were deliberate, careful, but her eyes did not wander. She was leaving. She had walked into this camp with nothing but dust clinging to her, and she would walk out with the same. Only now there was a pause before the leaving. Her gaze swept once over the tent. Then it stopped on the flag hanging at its entrance, faded red, worn white, the cross still visible but softened by wind and dirt. Once she had been told to turn from it. Once it had meant death. Now, in her eyes, it was only cloth wide enough to keep the cold from a child's bones. She took it down without ceremony, folded it, not like a banner but like a blanket. At the fire, she placed it on the ground and set it around a small bundle. Wildflowers from the edge of the dry creek bed, and a baby's rattle made from seeds in a stitched pouch. She did not look for him as she did this. She knew he would find it. At dawn the next day, when he stepped outside, it was there, the flag, wrapped and waiting. He crouched to touch the cloth, fingers brushing the flowers, the rattle, the folds she had pressed into it with care. It took him a long time to move his hand. He understood then. The flag had carried division, command, and blood. But in her hands for one night it had carried warmth. Symbols change, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a single breath. He lifted the bundle, not to reclaim it, but to keep it from the wind. And in the quiet that followed, he felt the weight of something new. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but the first fragile proof that survival can wear many shapes. By the time the sun pushed its way over the horizon, she was gone. No sound of footsteps leaving, no final look through the flap of the tent. Just absence, sudden and complete, like the wind had claimed her before the light could. On his cot, where the flag had once been folded, there was something smaller. Hair-carved wooden animal, its surface darkened by years of touch. The shape was unmistakably Sioux, its lines both delicate and unyielding, a remnant of a world older than the war, older than his own name. He picked it up, weighing it in his palm, the way one tests the truth of a memory. Somewhere beyond the desert's reach in the next village she came to, a child was born, a boy. She named him Tate, the wind. Not for the storms that tear roofs away, but for the breath that moves unseen between two people who never shared their names, yet shared something deeper. Years passed. The war faded into the kind of history that fills books, but leaves the land unchanged. He found himself often by a river's edge, the grey of his old uniform catching the light in strange ways. Sometimes he sat for hours, eyes fixed on the far bank, as though it might rise up and speak, as though it owed him an answer. He didn't think of her as an enemy nor as a savior. She was a crossing, brief, dangerous, necessary. What was left behind was not a memory to be polished and held up to the light. It was a transformation, a shift that could not be undone. The desert remembers everything, but every so often it forgives. Not with words, not with promises, only with the faint, untraceable wind that moves between two distant places, carrying the warmth of a shared fire into a night that would have been colder without it.